I thought my life was settled and predictable until a woman with just one suitcase moved in next door. She said she didn't plan to stay, and I believed her. But from the moment our eyes met in that quiet stairwell, everything I had learned about keeping my distance started to fall apart. Some encounters don't look important at first until they change everything. Hello, my name is Kevin. I'm 32 years old, and I work as a mechanic in a small garage not far from where I live. I've been fixing cars since I was 19. I live alone in a quiet apartment building on the edge of the neighborhood, the kind of place where people usually don't talk much and mind their own business. My life is simple. I work long hours, come home tired, and try not to expect too much from anything or anyone. That evening started like many others. It was late, my hands still smelled of oil, and my back hurt from leaning over engines all day. The garage had been busy, and I stayed longer than planned. I remember thinking only about a shower and a quiet meal. When I parked my car and walked toward the entrance of my building, I noticed the hallway lights were on brighter than usual. Inside the stairwell, I heard a sound that didn't belong there. A suitcase. Someone was struggling to drag it up the stairs. When I turned the corner, I saw her. She stood on the first landing with a single medium-sized suitcase beside her. She looked tired, but not lost. Her coat was neatly buttoned, her hair pulled back, her posture straight despite the weight she was carrying. She didn't look like someone moving in permanently. She looked like someone passing through. I asked if she needed help. She hesitated for a second, then nodded. I picked up the suitcase. It wasn't heavy, but the fact that it was the only thing she had with her stayed in my mind. We walked up together in silence until we reached her floor. She thanked me and introduced herself as Teresa. Her voice was calm, professional, almost careful. She told me she had just arrived that day. When I told her I lived downstairs, she smiled politely, like someone used to meeting strangers and not getting attached. At her door, she unlocked it slowly, then turned to me and said she was only here on a work assignment. Just a short stay. She didn't plan to stay long. The way she said it sounded more like a rule than a plan. I nodded, handed her the suitcase, and wished her a good evening. As I went downstairs, I realized my heart was beating faster than it should. I told myself it was nothing. Just a neighbor. Just a moment. That night, sleep didn't come easily. Over the next few days, I began noticing her everywhere in small, ordinary ways. By the mailboxes in the morning. In the courtyard, talking on the phone. Once at a nearby cafe, sitting alone with a cup of tea and a notebook. We exchanged simple greetings. Nothing more. One afternoon, I found her standing by her car, looking frustrated. The engine wouldn't start. I offered to take a look. It was a small issue, something simple. While I worked, she watched quietly. She told me she was a doctor, working long shifts at a clinic across town. She said the hours were exhausting, but familiar. There was something steady about her. No drama. No big stories. Just tired honesty. When the car started, she let out a small breath of relief and thanked me again. She said she wasn't used to asking for help. I told her I wasn't used to offering it outside the garage. We both smiled, and for a moment, the space between us felt lighter. Later that evening, we ran into each other in the hallway again. She mentioned how strange it felt to be in a new place with no real connections. I told her I'd lived here for years and still felt like a guest sometimes. She looked at me differently then, as if she understood something without asking. As she turned to go inside her apartment, she paused. She said she had arrived with only one suitcase because she believed nothing in her life was permanent anymore. Then she added, quietly, that seeing me that first night had made the place feel less temporary. I didn't know what to say. I watched her door close and stood there longer than necessary, listening to the silence of the building. For the first time in a long while, I felt something shift inside me. Not hope, not love, just the sense that something real had begun, whether I was ready for it or not. The days after Teresa moved and passed quietly, but they no longer felt empty. I began noticing the small routines of the building more than before. The sound of doors opening in the morning, footsteps on the stairs, voices drifting in from the courtyard. Somehow, she had become part of that rhythm without trying. We kept running into each other in ordinary ways. Nothing that would look special from the outside. Once by the mailboxes, where she struggled to open one that kept sticking. Another time in the small grocery store around the corner, both of us reaching for the same loaf of bread and laughing awkwardly about it. These moments were short, but they stayed with me longer than they should have. One morning, as I was heading to work, She stood outside the building, clearly unsure which way to go. She asked about the bus schedule. I explained which line would take her closer to the clinic. She thanked me and asked about my work. When I told her about the garage, she listened carefully, as if the details mattered. No one had done that in a long time. In the evenings, I often came home late. Grease still under my nails, mind heavy from the day. One night, as I unlocked my door, I heard her apartment door open. She asked if I knew a good place nearby to eat after a long shift. I suggested a small cafe a few streets away. She hesitated, then asked if I wanted to join her. I almost said no out of habit, but something stopped me. The cafe was quiet, warm, and smelled of coffee and bread. We sat by the window, talking slowly, carefully. She told me about her work, about patients who reminded her why she became a doctor, and days that left her emotionally drained. I told her about cars that came in barely holding together and customers who trusted me with things they couldn't fix themselves. We didn't talk about the past much, just enough to understand that we had both learned how to carry disappointment quietly. There was no flirting, no heavy silence, just an easy calm that surprised me. When we left, she thanked me for the company and said she hadn't realized how much she needed a normal evening. Another day, I found her sitting on the steps outside the building, looking lost in thought. She admitted she had a difficult call with someone back home. I didn't ask who. She didn't offer details. We sat there for a while, saying nothing. That felt more honest than advice. Later that week, her car refused to start again. She knocked on my door, apologetic, clearly uncomfortable asking for help. I fixed the issue quickly, but she stayed nearby, watching my hands move, asking small questions. When I finished, she said she felt safe around me. The words stayed with me long after she left. One evening, she invited me for tea. Her apartment was simple, almost empty. A suitcase in the corner, a few clothes neatly arranged, books stacked on the table. It didn't feel temporary, but it didn't feel settled either. She noticed me looking around and said she didn't like collecting things when she wasn't sure where she belonged. She asked why I lived alone. I told her about my last relationship, how it ended quietly, without drama, but left a distance inside me I never fully closed. She listened without interrupting. Then she shared that she had left something behind too. A life that looked stable from the outside, but felt hollow inside. That night, as I walked back to my apartment, I realized how naturally our lives were beginning to overlap. No promises, no expectations. Just two people finding comfort in each other's presence. I told myself to stay careful. She was only here temporarily. She had said that from the beginning. Still, each time I heard her steps in the hallway or saw her light on at night, the building felt less quiet. Something was growing between us, slowly and without force. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel the need to step away from it. The more time Teresa and I spent together, the harder it became to pretend that what was growing between us was just convenience. It wasn't forced, and it wasn't dramatic, but it was real in a way I hadn't felt before. Still, there was always something unspoken between us, something careful, as if we were both waiting for the moment when reality would interrupt. One evening, after a long shift at the garage, I found Teresa sitting in the courtyard. It was already dark, the air cool and quiet. She looked tired in a different way than usual. Not physically, but emotionally. I sat down beside her without asking. She didn't move away. She told me her assignment was more demanding than expected. The clinic was understaffed, the patients heavier on her conscience than she liked to admit. She said being a doctor often meant carrying other people's pain home with her, even when she tried not to. I listened, knowing better than to interrupt. Sometimes people don't need solutions, only presence. After a moment of silence, she said there was something she hadn't told me yet. She reminded me of the night we met, how she arrived with just one suitcase. She said that wasn't only because the assignment was temporary. It was because she had left in a hurry. Not from danger, but from exhaustion. From a relationship that slowly erased her sense of self. She said she hadn't planned to start over. She only wanted space. I told her I understood more than she thought. I spoke about my own past, about how my last relationship didn't end with a fight, but with distance. How two people can slowly stop seeing each other even while living side by side. I admitted that since then, I avoided getting close. Not because I didn't want connection, but because I didn't trust myself to survive losing it again. She looked at me for a long moment, then said that meeting me had complicated her plan. She hadn't expected to feel anything here. She hadn't expected to care. That scared her. In the days that followed, something shifted between us. We were still kind, still close, but more careful. As if acknowledging the truth had made everything more fragile. I noticed she spent more time on the phone, more evenings alone. I didn't ask why. She didn't offer explanations. One night, she knocked on my door unexpectedly. She looked nervous, almost hesitant. She said she needed to be honest. Her assignment had a clear end date. She had known it from the start, but hadn't wanted to say it out loud. She was afraid that saying it would make it real. I felt a weight settle in my chest. I had known this was coming, but knowing and hearing are different things. I told her I appreciated her honesty. I didn't ask her to stay. I didn't ask for promises. The words stayed stuck somewhere between fear and pride. After that conversation, we both pulled back slightly. Not out of anger, but protection. We still talked, still shared meals, still helped each other in small ways. But there was a new distance. I found myself questioning every moment. Was I getting attached to someone who was already leaving? Teresa noticed the change too. One evening, as we walked back from the cafe, she stopped and said she hated how careful we had become. She said she didn't want fear to decide everything for her anymore. But she also didn't want to hurt me. I told her I didn't know what the right choice was. I only knew that pretending nothing mattered wasn't working anymore. We stood there for a long time, neither of us moving, neither of us reaching out. That night, lying awake in my apartment, I realized how deeply she had already become part of my life. The thought of her leaving felt heavier than I expected. Still, I told myself that wanting someone didn't mean asking them to change their plans. The next morning, she left early for work. I watched her from the window as she walked down the street, carrying the same calm determination she had on the night she arrived. And for the first time, I understood that what we were facing wasn't about timing alone. It was about whether either of us was willing to risk choosing something uncertain over something safe. After Teresa told me her assignment had a clear end date, everything around us seemed quieter, heavier. The building was the same, the street unchanged, but the space between our conversations felt different. We still met almost every day, but now every moment carried an unspoken question neither of us wanted to ask directly. She began staying later at the clinic. I knew because her light was often still off when I came home at night. When we did meet, she looked more tired, more distracted. I didn't blame her. She was preparing herself to leave, even if she hadn't said it out loud yet. At the garage, I caught myself thinking about her during the day, about the way she listened when I spoke, about how calm she felt next to me. I tried to remind myself that this was temporary, that I had known it from the beginning. Still, knowing something and accepting it are not the same. One evening, she asked if I wanted to walk with her after dinner. We didn't choose a destination. We just walked through the neighborhood, past familiar streets, past houses with lights glowing behind curtains. She spoke about her work, about a patient who reminded her why she loved medicine, and another who made her question whether she had the strength to keep doing it. I listened, but I could feel something building beneath her words. Finally, she stopped walking. She turned to me and said she had received confirmation that her assignment would end sooner than expected. She tried to sound calm, professional, but her voice betrayed her. She said she didn't know what she wanted anymore. I didn't answer right away. My first instinct was to protect myself, to stay silent, to let things end without pain. But silence can hurt just as much as words. I told her I cared about her, but I didn't know how to handle knowing she was leaving. I admitted that I was afraid of investing in something that might disappear. She nodded. She said she understood. Then she looked at me and said the words she had been holding back for weeks. She said she hadn't planned to stay here. She had come for work, for distance, for a break from her old life. But meeting me had changed that. Seeing me that first night, helping her with that single suitcase, had made her feel something she wasn't ready for but couldn't ignore. I didn't plan to stay until I saw you, she said quietly. Hearing it out loud made everything feel real. Not romantic or dramatic, just real. I wanted to reach for her, to tell her everything would work out. Instead, I stood there, unsure which part of myself to trust. That night, we parted without deciding anything. We didn't argue. We didn't promise. We simply went back to our separate apartments, carrying the same uncertainty. I lay awake for hours, replaying her words, questioning my hesitation. I asked myself whether avoiding pain was worth missing something meaningful. The next day passed slowly. I worked without focus, made small mistakes I normally wouldn't. When evening came, I found myself standing outside the clinic, unsure why I was there. I waited until her shift ended. When she walked out and saw me, surprise crossed her face, followed by relief. I told her I didn't want grand plans or guarantees. I told her I was tired of living cautiously. I said I didn't know what the future would look like, but I wanted to face it honestly, without pretending that what we felt didn't matter. She listened, her eyes fixed on me, and for the first time since that conversation, she smiled without hesitation. She said she didn't expect certainty from me. She only wanted honesty. She admitted she was scared too, but leaving without trying would hurt more than staying and risking disappointment. We didn't solve everything that night. There were still questions, still practical realities waiting for us. But something shifted. The distance between us closed, not through promises, but through choice. As we walked back together, the neighborhood felt different again. Not because anything had changed around us, but because we had finally allowed ourselves to acknowledge what was already there. After that evening near the clinic, nothing felt rushed anymore. Teresa and I didn't suddenly become different people. We still woke up early, still went to work, still carried our own responsibilities. But something had settled between us. A quiet certainty that we were no longer pretending this was temporary. A few days later, she told me she had spoken to her supervisor. There was an option to extend her placement. Not forever, not without conditions, but long enough to stop living out of a suitcase. She said she hadn't made a final decision yet. She wanted to be sure she was staying for the right reason, not out of fear or impulse. I respected that. I didn't push. I didn't try to convince her. I told her that whatever she chose, I wanted it to be something she could stand behind months from now. She smiled and said that was one of the reasons she trusted me. Life continued in small, ordinary ways. We cooked dinner together in the evenings. Sometimes at my place, sometimes at hers. Her apartment slowly began to change. A second bag appeared. Then a few framed photos. Nothing dramatic, just signs of someone allowing herself to settle. One evening, as we walked through the neighborhood, she said that for the first time in years, she didn't feel like she was running away from something. She felt like she was moving toward something instead. Hearing that meant more to me than any promise. A week later, she came home earlier than usual. She stood in the doorway, took a breath, and said she had made her decision. She had requested the longer placement, and it was approved. She wasn't staying because of comfort or convenience. She was staying because this life, with its quiet routines and honest moments, felt real. I didn't celebrate loudly. I didn't need to. I simply held her and felt the weight of uncertainty lift. For the first time in a long while, the future didn't feel like something to fear. Months passed. Teresa became part of the neighborhood, part of the building, part of my everyday life. People knew her name. The suitcase that once defined her arrival was now stored away, no longer needed. We didn't talk about love as something dramatic or overwhelming. It showed itself in consistency, in showing up, in choosing each other on ordinary days. One evening, as we walked home together, she said that arriving with one suitcase had been the loneliest decision she ever made. Staying had been the bravest. I told her that opening the door to help a stranger had changed my life more than I ever expected. Our story didn't end with a grand moment. It ended with something better. Stability. Trust. Two people who met by chance and chose, day by day, to build something honest. And this time, neither of us was planning to leave.